So today we're going to talk about one of the most polarizing figures of the 20th century, a man who ruled for over 40 decades and left a mark on history that's impossible to ignore, Muammar Gaddafi.
And that's the central question, isn't it? How does that even happen? We're going to dive into the incredible and incredibly complex story of his life, a journey of revolution, absolute power, and a unique ideology that didn't just reshape a country, it consistently challenged the entire world.
You know, his 42 years in power were just packed with drama. I mean, from his shocking rise in a bloodless coup to writing his own strange political manifesto, then becoming this international pariah, only to make a surprising return to the world stage right before his violent, dramatic fall. This timeline really gives us the roadmap for his incredible story.
So, where did it all start? To really get who Gaddafi became, you have to go right back to the beginning. His humble origins were, without a doubt, the foundation for his entire revolutionary worldview. See, growing up poor in a tent in the desert, that experience forged a deep-seated anger towards elites and Western powers. He was completely captivated by the wave of Arab nationalism that was sweeping across the region, especially by figures like Egypt's Nasser. For him, this wasn't just some political fad, it became his life's mission. And get this, at just 27 years old, this super ambitious army officer pulls off a swift, bloodless coup. He kicks out the king, but he doesn't just call himself president. Oh no, he declares himself the ideological, revolutionary leader of a brand new Libya. Okay, so once he was in charge, Gaddafi wasn't just content to, govern. He had this wild, radical vision to completely tear down the old Libya and rebuild it from scratch, based on his own very unique and, let's say, controversial philosophy. He called his invention the Jamahiriya, which means state of the masses. The whole idea was laid out in his famous, or infamous, Green Book. He called it the Third Universal Theory, a totally new path where, supposedly, the people themselves would rule directly through a web of committees and congresses. But here's the thing. The theory and the reality, they were worlds apart. While the Jamahiriya was sold as direct democracy, in practice, it was a rigid, top-down system that was completely controlled by Gaddafi and his loyal revolutionary committees. Any opposition was ruthlessly crushed. It was a state that answered to one man and one man only. One of the first things Gaddafi did, and this was a total game changer, was to nationalize Libya's massive oil reserves. With one move, he funneled all that incredible wealth directly to the state, and almost overnight, Libya became one of the richest countries in Africa per person. And what did they do with all that new cash? Well, it was poured into huge social programs and mind-bogglingly ambitious projects, like the Great Man-Made River. For a lot of ordinary Libyans, this meant a real, tangible, and dramatic improvement in their standard of living. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? He was so much more than a politician. He was a master of image and propaganda. I mean, the flamboyant military uniforms, the all-female bodyguard unit, insisting on meeting world leaders in a tent. It was all part of this eccentric persona he built. He wasn't a president. He was a revolutionary guide. But while all of this was happening inside Libya, on the world stage, a very different story was unfolding. His aggressive and provocative foreign policy would slowly but surely turn him and his country into an international pariah. It all really put him on a collision course with the West. He was funding armed militant groups all over the globe. The conflict escalated from direct military clashes, like the U.S. bombing of Tripoli in '86, to direct links to international terrorism. And nothing was more infamous than the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. The result of all this? Absolutely crippling UN sanctions that just wrecked the Libyan economy. So now he's backed into a corner. He's a global outcast, the economy is in shambles, the once defiant revolutionary was forced to make a dramatic U-turn, really, just to survive. And in a move that honestly shocked everyone, he did a complete 180. He publicly gave up his weapons of mass destruction programs, he accepted responsibility for the Lockerbie bombing, and he paid reparations to the victims' families. It was a huge shift. Sanctions were lifted, and Libya was brought back in from the cold. But it couldn't hide the deep-seated problems that were brewing at home. Because even with all that oil money, things on the ground were far from perfect. You had a whole generation of young people with no jobs. You had widespread corruption, and decades with absolutely no political freedom. It was a powder keg of frustration, just waiting for a spark. And that spark came in 2011, with the Arab Spring. When that wave of uprisings hit Libya, Gaddafi responded with brutal force. Protests exploded into a full-blown civil war, and that, in turn, triggered a NATO-led military intervention against his regime. His 42-year reign came to a shocking, violent end. After months on the run, he was found and killed by rebel fighters in his own hometown of Sirte, the very region where his entire story began. It wasn't just the death of a leader, it was the total collapse of the system he had built completely around himself.
So here we are, more than a decade after his death, and what's left? Well, what's left is a deeply fractured and fiercely debated legacy. It's complicated.
He's still such a polarizing figure. For some, he's the revolutionary builder who used the country's oil wealth to create stability and give people a better life. But for others, he was nothing more than a brutal tyrant who crushed anyone who opposed him, sponsored terrorism, and in the end drove his own country into ruin.
See, the entire state, the whole system, was built on the authority of one single person. So when he fell, it didn't just create a leadership gap, it created a total power vacuum. The central authority completely collapsed, leaving a void that militias and political factions have been fighting to fill ever since.
Ultimately, Gaddafi's story is this powerful cautionary tale about authoritarian power, and it forces us to ask a really difficult question. Even when a strongman might bring development or stability, what is the true cost a nation pays when its entire system is built to serve just one person?